Hello, my name is David Charles Rowan, and just to introduce myself, I've been a teacher and practitioner of astrology for 29 years. I was lucky enough to be one of the first 6 people to be awarded a Master of Arts degree in cultural astronomy and astrology. I've also been teaching neuroholistic therapy for 25 years and have a Master of Science degree in psychosocial studies. It's been an interest of mine for many years to look at the correlations between astrological patterns and activity in human societies, largely through economics and politics, but also other things like the arts and conflicts and things as well. And I thought that it might be a useful thing to look at the astrology of the moment and also to have a look at the astrology of what's coming up so that it may illuminate some things. It might give people a framework of how to kind of view what's taking place, and also it may inspire some hope for our tomorrows as well. But we need to begin at the beginning. Now, there isn't time in this video session to describe what astrology is or what it isn't, and the anatomy of an astrological birth chart. There is a second video in this series that's going to address that, and that will be released on the 1st of May 2020. So if you look at YouTube on the 1st of May 2020, you'll find the astrological birth chart by David Charles Rowan, and that will explain a great deal about what astrology is and isn't. So for the moment, I have to do this with a sense of presumed knowledge. So I'm assuming that you'll be able to kind of follow the different things I'm going to say. If you have any questions or you'd like to find out more, you can go to this website, rowanastrology.com, and I'll be happy to help you. Okay, so I think the good thing to do then is to start at the beginning of the story, which is here. So this is where we are. As you can see, this is our local star, the Sun, here, and around it there are objects in orbit. So we have Mercury closest to the Sun, then Venus, pretty much the same size as planet Earth, and then planet Earth. And we're in what astronomers often call the Goldilocks zone, which means that we are far enough away from the Sun that we don't get boiled, but we're also close enough to the Sun that we don't freeze. We also have a molten core at the heart of the Earth, which creates an electromagnetic radio kind of shield around the Earth. So the solar wind doesn't get kind of infused in our atmosphere. So our atmosphere maintains itself because it's almost like a stone in a river, as it were. But some of the photons from the Sun do get caught up in our atmosphere, and they manifest as the northern lights, and there are southern lights as well. Just outside the Earth, there's our moon that orbits around us, and then Mars. Mars is too small to retain a hot core, so as it cooled, it lost its ability to have its electromagnetic energy shield, and we believe that what took place is that its atmosphere was stripped away. Outside of Mars, there's an asteroid belt, which may have been a broken up planet, we don't know. And beyond that, Jupiter, the first of the gas giants, and outside Jupiter, Saturn with its rings of ice orbiting it, Uranus with its moons that orbit in a different elliptic plane, Neptune, and for some astronomers, Pluto. For other astrologers, Pluto is a dwarf planet with its kind of companion of Charon as well. So that's the kind of the sense of the solar system that we are currently living in, and of course we are here on this part here, right? Now, the reason for showing you this is to put these times in a context and to look at things in a broader context. Because one thing astrologers tend to do is we look at cycles, and we look at cycles of things that take place in orbits of time. That may mean very short cycles, like the seasons, for example, or much longer, protracted cycles, like the one I'm about to introduce you to. All right, now, as you know, as we orbit the Sun, but our Earth tilts on an axis, it leans over, and that means then as we go around our star, that different parts of the Earth are illuminated by the sun at different times of the year. And apart from people living exactly on the equator, we have this kind of sense that there is summer and winter, but also intermediate seasons of autumn and spring. And in the summer, we have our longest day, and in winter, we have our shortest day. So the hours of daylight are not in equilibrium. They go to an extreme ratio. But that is redressed when the hours of daylight are equal to the hours of nighttime. On one time of the year, as things are growing, when we're in the growing season, we call that the spring equinox or the vernal equinox. And when things are in a state of decay, when the hours of light and dark are in balance again, we call that the autumn equinox. And because the Earth is tilted on its axis, that means that it performs a peculiar rotational orbit as it goes around the sun. It doesn't repeat the exact same circuit each time. In fact, it does this. So if you look at the incline of the ecliptic in relationship to the Earth, and you look at how that rotates through our celestial sphere, it forms a cycle that's about 25,000 years approximately. Here's a normal graphic view, and so you can see that ecliptic plane cycling around, and as it does that, the path of it, the line of sight, kind of cycles through the constellations. All right. Now that might sound a bit complex, so just to make it a little bit easier to comprehend, this is a video that was put together and posted up onto YouTube, and I've put a piece of music of my own as a soundtrack, but it's, yes, it will explain exactly what it is. So take a look. Isn't that a beautiful video? I hope that explained the precession of the equinoxes, or at least that's what we call them in astrology. That 25,000 year cycle, if you divide it into 12 equal sections, you get periods of approximately 2,000 years. And that's where we get the name of the age of Aquarius. So the new age, the age of Aquarius, are drawing from astrology when they describe a particular epoch or period of time. So these were approximations, of course, but if you look back over 2,000 year periods, you'll find that between 12,000 and 10,000 BC, or before Common Era, that's when global warming accelerated and the Ice Age began to rapidly decrease. Up until that point, people were highly nomadic, eking out a living in vast wastes of tundra and ice. But it was between 10 and 8,000 BC, in the age of Cancer, the sign of the home, that people began to settle and become sedentary in certain spaces. There's evidence of a village around Jericho, around 900 BC, where people began to kind of stay put instead of constantly be moving around. And so that would have meant that there would be a different change in culture for that particular tribe as well. And so instead of perhaps people going and doing a little bit of everything, they could start to specialize in what they were doing. In the age of Gemini, traditionally thought of as a sign of the zodiac that suggests or represents language and communication, there is a form of writing that began in this period of time called Vinca. Vinca symbols appeared in southeastern Europe around 6,500 BC. And some historians say that it's a proto-writing. They were just kind of markings to represent something rather than an actual form of writing itself. Other historians hold the view that it's a proto-writing that would have been the foundation of other forms of writing, like hieroglyphs and cuneiform, etc., which would have come later. The age of Taurus, between 4 and 6,000 BC, saw the advent of agriculture as we know it. Cities began to be built out of stone. Cultures that worship the sacred cow began to emerge in this period of time. And the cow worshippers gave rise to the land worshippers, who emerged between 2 and 4,000 BC. This is also a period in which a new phenomenon of metal and iron was discovered, and the Iron Age brought with it a tidal wave of bloodthirsty warriors who took their philosophies and their knowledge around the entire known world at the time. In the age of Pisces, the sign associated with Neptune, the god of the sea, you needed maritime superiority, really, to be anyone. If you had an empire and you had command of the oceans, then your empire could be mighty. And if you didn't have command of the oceans, then you would be diminished. During the age of Pisces, we saw a period, this sign is associated with healing, is associated with the fine arts, and the artistry, the musicianship that emerged during the age of Pisces has been incredible, a flourishing of culture for mankind, but also a lot of confusion as well, and escapism through various forms of chemicals. Yes, so what's next? Well, different astrological systems disagree about when the age of Aquarius starts. There isn't an astrology, there are astrologies, and every astrologer has their own subjective perspective on this ancient art, because astrology is not a science, it is an art, right? And so different astrological systems would say that the age of Aquarius begins somewhere between the end of the 18th century and around the middle of around this century, around 2050-ish. So there's a transition time from the old age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. There isn't a demarcation line in the sand that says you are now here, not quite like that. It's a little bit like looking at, when does spring begin? Does spring begin when there are the first snowdrops? It's still chilly and it may even snow. Does spring begin when daffodils emerge? But then they can get covered in snow as well. Or does spring begin when everything is green and bushy and the frosts have disappeared? When is the beginning of spring? Not the establishment of spring, but its start. And sometimes when seasons change, there's a kind of almost an ambiguity about when the beginning takes place, which is why you can't necessarily have a date line in the sand, but you can get a gist of these epochs and quantities of time. So what does Aquarius signify then? Well, these symbols of astrology are polysemous, which means they have multiple layers of meaning. So in other words, there's if you like, a preferred expression or an unpreferred expression. Some people would say there's a higher expression and a lower expression. Other people might say there is a light expression or a dark expression. Various phrases and terms which describe polarity. But within polysemy, there are grey areas too, right? So in one sense, Aquarius is a sign of collective thought, of group mind. So this suggests that we're going to go into a period of time when people think about the whole family rather than just the individual. And by family, I mean the entire family of man. And so the extreme of that would be for people to consider themselves to be citizens of Earth rather than someone who is of this nationality or that nationality. In an extreme form, it would represent a form of altruism, when the whole world is policed by a legal system that cares for everybody. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is as close as human beings have got so far to being able to create a unified document that would describe an altruistic approach to all human beings and all of humanity. Different nations have different relationships with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights at the moment, but the astrological suggestion is that as we move through time and we get deeper and deeper into the heart of the age of Aquarius, around 1,000 years from now, that that sense of there being a unified law that cares and protects for everybody is a potential that we may be able to aspire to. And that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But how could we get to that? Aquarius is also a sign of turbulent change as well, and of social reform. And there would need to be much social reform. From an altruistic perspective, for small percentage of a species to have 90% of the species' resources is out of balance and out of kilter. That's not altruistic, that's greedy. And so that would have to be redressed. But how can that be possibly redressed? Because it's impossible to force a person to kind of relinquish their resources unless, of course, you have a taxation system that it functions well and is fair. And I don't just mean fair to some, I mean fair to everybody, And if that sounds like it's moving towards almost like a purist theology of Marxism, then that might sound a little bit like that, But that then leads us into looking at the shadow side of the Aquarius. Aquarius, in one sense, could represent a utopian vision of the best of mankind. Literally, we are children of the earth. Or some kind of Orwellian nightmare where there's one world government that rides roughshod over everybody, and we're all kind of subservient to the yoke of the great power, whatever that might be. Planet Earth as one big Auschwitz does not sound like a very nice idea at all. And how can you get different people with their very entrenched views to relinquish those in favour of some kind of universal citizenship? If there's going to be one world notion of citizen, then that means one world government, one world police force, one world law. But which law? American laws, or South American laws, or Shia law, or the legal system of Switzerland, or the legal system of Ireland. The legal system of where? Which one of those laws is going to be it? Will it be the Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations? That's a possibility. But what about the people who insist that certain members of their population are beaten, or imprisoned, or treated badly, or assumed to be wrong before they're even tried? So, to be able to get people of various cultures, various histories, various entrenched notions and paradigms, to be able to kind of open up to being able to treat every single person in their community with fairness, with dignity, with respect and kindness, to get humanity to change in that way. It needs something rather radical or dramatic to do that. I have no idea what kind of dramatic or radical thing that could be, but I do know that becoming an altruistic society of citizens on Earth, a family of mankind, is a plausible possibility during the time of the age of Aquarius. But there's 2,000 years of it to go, and we don't know what's going to happen yet, right? Another thing is that Aquarius can represent electricity and electrical technology. So all electrical technology and electromagnetic technology comes under the jurisdiction of being represented by the symbol of Aquarius. So this suggests that over the next 2,000 years, and certainly since the end of the 18th century, with Mesmer with his magnetism and so forth, Faraday with his electricity, Watt looking at things, and Ohm as well, those early pioneers of electricity have now begun to morph into these wonderful global technologies that we have, where everyone is wired and networked, and we're only at the very beginning. Right? So where can that go? That really depends on what the disposition of human beings is. If we have a disposition towards, kindness, altruism, caring for everybody, then that means we can have technologies that are just amazing and serve everybody well. On the other hand, if it's the shadow side of Aquarius, then another meaning of Aquarius is madness. And so there could be mad science that's unchecked. And that could ultimately, obviously, end the human race if that's taken to an extreme. So exactly what we do with our very clever brains, and what we do with our love of technologies, now we're beginning to harness electricity and electrical systems. I think that even, if you could leap forwards in time 50 years from now, you'd be astounded at what's taking place. So going forwards 2,000 years, we won't know. But there is one thing we do know, and that is that this is a cycle. So although the things that we're experiencing now and in the coming times might seem to be incredible and unique and amazing, our ancestors went through similar epoch 25,000 years ago, and 50,000 years ago, and 75,000 years ago, right? And our descendants will go through something similar 25,000 years up ahead in time, because it's just a season, if you think about it, but it's a long-term, protracted season. So I just wanted to kind of mention this because it puts what's happening in a kind of a broader perspective, but we need to get a little bit closer than that, I think. So I mentioned when we looked at the solar system picture that some people include Pluto as being relevant in the solar system, and other people dismiss it as a dwarf planet. But for astrologers, the meaning associated with Pluto still has relevance. And that would mean then that out of all the planets that are referred to generally in horoscopic astrology, Pluto is the slowest moving one. So we're just going to have a quick look at the movements of Pluto for a moment. Hold on a second. Just wheel that forward. There we go. Right. Now, this is the moment that Pluto went to the beginning of Scorpio. We call that ingress. When a planet changes sign, it ingressed into Scorpio in 1983. Now, it didn't just kind of move into the sign of Scorpio, it oscillated on the line for about a year. It always tends to do that. So there's a sort of changeover. So during Pluto's time of moving through the sign of Scorpio on its way to Sagittarius, that would have meant that through global politics and cultures and things, we would have noticed scorpionic things taking place. Here in the UK, there was Thatcherism. There was a clampdown on the free movement of people as well. The Criminal Justice Act, New Age travellers being contained. Even people on houseboats were told that they weren't allowed to just freely go where they wished to anymore. They had to declare their moorings. On a global sense, things that had been repressed for a long period of time came to the surface and then fell apart. Apartheid ended during this period of time. The Berlin Wall came down. Glasnost and Perestroika sealed the end of the Soviet Empire. And then Pluto went into Sagittarius in 1995. In 1995, there were the stirrings of a discontent in a religion. Well, in fact, in a couple of religions. One of those religions was the Church of England, and there were now lady vicars, and this was causing certain dissent in various corners of the Anglican Church, because it's not just in England, it's all across the what used to be the Empire, but is now the Commonwealth. So some people like the idea of lady vicars and other people don't. So that was a bit of a contentious thing. But there are also things that are happening in various forms of foreign policy which were causing upset in parts of the world that had another of the Abrahamic religions, and that is that of Islam. And of course, if you think of the general sort of topic and conversation that would have taken place around, say, for example, Islam in the UK in typical English homes, if there's such a thing, it wouldn't have featured really at all. By the end of that period of time, by 2005, it was on the news a lot. Suddenly, religion went to the forefront. Foreign affairs, international relations, foreign policy, and global religion and the schisms between global religions became forefront, absolutely salient in what was taking place in terms of politics, decisions, and resources, and how different countries were treating their own populations and the populations of other people as well. We've been living through those times, and then in 2008, Pluto was in Capricorn. Now, Pluto went into Capricorn just slightly before that, the year before, but he did that oscillating thing. And Capricorn is a sign of structure. So the structure of the Earth is rock. The structure of life is based on carbon. The structure of a society is its laws and economy. And Pluto, the planet that represents intense change and transformation, has been moving through Capricorn up until now. Right? So, if the structure of a society is its economy, and Pluto, the planet of change and transformation, is moving through the Capricorn, the sign of economy and politics, that would suggest that if there's anything untenable within how people conduct themselves in the banking world or the economic world, then it would collapse like a pack of cards. Right, well, that seems to have happened. I mentioned that Capricorn represents carbon. In the same way that Cancer or the Moon is related with water, Mars or Aries are related with iron, then for Saturn, Capricorn, it's carbon. And that means fossil fuel. Right. So fossil fuels have suddenly come to the agenda. We've filled the oceans with plastic. There are microbeads of plastic in krill. There are microbeads inside us. Pluto, the planet of death, is moving through the world, being carried upon little beads of plastic. Right, that's not very clever. So during this period of time, in order for economies to survive, they'll have to have a re-evaluation. Pluto hasn't finished going through Capricorn yet. It's still got a couple of years to go. Pluto goes into Aquarius beginning in 2023. So it'll do the oscillation thing for a year or so. And it won't be really until 2025 that it's sort of in there, you know. So there's still a couple of years to go with Pluto moving through Capricorn, and that means there's a couple of years potential for there to be a global economic crash again if the banking system and if the way that we treat our resources isn't balanced and fair and efficient. Yes. So in my astrology classes, we look at things like this. And we've been talking about the crash of 2020 for about 4 or 5 years. And there are some other things we've been discussing for a little while, which I want to share with you, which is one of the reasons, for doing this video for you. But coming up, Pluto's going to go into Aquarius. So with Pluto going into Aquarius, that suggests there'll be a period of about 20 years where everything to do with Aquarius becomes intensified, right? So everything to do with social reform, everything to do with electromagnetic energy, everything to do with radio, everything to do with electronic technology, everything to do with a move towards altruism, but also the backlash of that and a desire for a country to want to kind of precipitate some kind of global control, depending on whether or not we're going down the altruistic kind of utopia route or whether or not we're heading ourselves down the kind of, global aspects route, right? So we can choose what we do and how we respond in that period of time will shape and steer what comes next. It's exciting. It's also a bit worrying, right? Because, of the potential for madness of that. And also the turbulence that comes with the breaking down of structures, but at the same time the excitement that comes with the rebuilding of new ones. In mythology, Uranus, the planet associated with Aquarius, was the starry heavens themselves, and every night the stars would lay down upon the earth, and they would produce children, quite often horrible children with 100 heads or cyclops with an eye in the middle of their forehead. And Uranus, disgusted at the sight of his own offspring, would bury them back into the soil of the earth, which is the equivalent of pushing your children back up into a lady's womb. Okay, I wasn't really pleased. But in its essence, this means that sometimes we can create things and then go back to the drawing board because we realise that what we've created doesn't necessarily suit or isn't necessarily fit for purpose. So it's an experimental time, and some of the experiments that human beings do during this period could be laudable and worthy, and some of them could be quite kind of Frankenstein-y in a funny kind of way. So yes, very important that somehow we keep a measure of what's taking place. And I think you'll find that this one thing this virus is doing globally is it's reminding humanity of our fragility, but it's also reminding humanity of our humanity, of the common ground that we all share. In the book The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, he talks about how genes have a kind of a selfish track. All they want to do is reproduce. But there's a chapter in that book on altruism as well, and that shows that a part of human survival is knowing that we are relational creatures. We do fit in community, and we survive when we enable everyone to thrive. Let's look at this a little bit more closely. This is through the lens of the United Kingdom. So if you're not in the UK, I do apologise for this slightly introverted look, but I am in this country and I don't understand the political systems of other countries. So I'm only able to talk about things from my local viewpoint. But at least it might give you an idea of the astrology, and I'd certainly recommend looking at the astrological uh, uh, correlations with the chart of the country that you're currently watching in, or that you live in, depending on when you're isolated at the moment. So this is the chart of the United Kingdom. You might kind of wonder, how can a country have a birth chart? A country is just the earth, isn't it? You know, the land I'm standing on. Well, yeah, it is. The land you're standing on is just the earth. But the land you're standing on isn't the country. Your country is an ideology. It's a political notion. It's a construct, right? The rocks and the soil aren't Britannia. Britannia is a particular name that was given to a sort of a political idea. So was Albion, so was Great Britain, and now the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the Commonwealth is the full title of that. So the particular kind of notion that we have at the moment began on 1801, just about 1 minute past midnight. So this is the birth chart that's drawn up for that. If the UK fragments because of Brexit, then there would be a new name, and at that stage there'd be a brand new birth chart again. So I'm not going to read the UK's chart right now. We'll do that at another stage. If you want to kind of learn with me, you're very welcome to. But what I wanted to show you was the astrology of the moment. Now, this is a birth chart inside a birth chart. So the birth chart in the middle here, this is the United Kingdom's birth chart. And around the outside of it, this other birth chart that encircles it, is where the planets are right now, at the time that I'm recording this. And you'll notice that I've removed some of the inner planets. So the Sun, the Moon, Mercury and Venus are missing. And that's to make it clearer for you to see. Right? And this particular page is what we call an animation page. So what I'm going to do is progress this forwards in time so you can see the UK charts remaining stationary in here, and you'll notice that these planets in the outside ring move in this direction, as if they're going from the bottom up towards the top, climbing on the right hand side, and then if they even get to the top, then they'll descend on the left hand side. All right. And in astrological forecasting, we look at these boxes, we call these houses, and they represent areas of life or contexts. And for quite some time, Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn, and Mars have been moving through a part of the UK's chart called the fourth house. The fourth house, in a person, in an individual's chart, would represent the inner self, the home, our family, what we're like when we're at home, and certain layers of the unconscious. The fifth house in an individual's chart would represent what we're like when we're social, when we're out in the world, when we're being creative, when we're romancing and dancing and creating things, including creating children. The sixth house in an individual's chart represents the mind-body relationship, our health, how we organise our day, the skills that we have, and our relationships with work colleagues. The reason for mentioning those I'll come to in a moment. Pluto went into the UK's fourth house in 2013, and Pluto will take until 2023 before it leaves the UK's fourth house. So that means that that's a long period of time, and during this period of time, Pluto, the planet that represents the depth of things, it represents repression, it represents irrevocable change, has seen almost like the underbelly of British society come up, almost like a collective psychological vomit in a way. We had the Margaret Thatcher died, that produced a polar kind of reaction within people. Operation Yewtree, Jimmy Savile, bishops being arrested for sexual abuse, artists who painted pictures of the Queen being jailed for sexual abuse or historical child abuse, grooming gangs, and a closet racism that literally revealed itself and seemed to have tacit permission to run amok. A lot of unpleasant facets and dynamics of the culture and the psyche of the UK coming up to the surface, being clearly visible and seen. But the advantage of that means that when something is known, it can be changed. It's when it's not known that's a problem. So one of the things that's also been emerging during this lockdown and the virus is that there's another side to British nature that comes out, and that is altruism, care and compassion, along with a critique for those that have been acting in a non-compassionate way. So, if it's the case, for example, that our care services and NHS have been depleted of resources, depleted of funding, depleted of staff, and are now, fragile in the light of, something like a pandemic, then that would indicate that there would be criticism for that. And that may mean then that those shortfalls in value then become addressed. That would be a good thing, because having a healthy health system is a very good thing. Right? Now, not only is Pluto chugging its way through the UK's 4th house and taking a long time to do it, Saturn is also moving through the UK's 4th house. Pluto, by the way, is going to be in the UK's 4th house until about 2032. So that's another 12 years to go, which means another 12 years of tumultuous agony for the UK psyche, in one sense, but also another 12 years to be able to rebuild, refashion ourselves, and find a new light within what it is to be on this island over the next 12 years. And there's some bright hope in that, if things are steered in the direction of healthy transformation rather than just, fearful collapse. Depends what we do with us. It depends what we do with ourselves and how we conduct ourselves with one another that will determine the direction of how these things flow. Saturn would have gone into the UK's 4th house around, when would that have been? Around 2015, that kind of time. And so things have been difficult in the UK, as you know, for the last few years. Saturn's going to leave the UK's 4th house. We'll see when that's going to be very soon. I want to make a jump. I'm going to leave the Mars and the Jupiter there for a second and look over here. Neptune is in Pisces at the moment, and Neptune's been moving through the UK's 6th house for about 3 or 4 years. The 6th house, as I mentioned, is the house, if this was a person, it would be associated with a mind-body relationship, with their health. It would be associated with a person's skills and how well they organise their day. That's how they organise their business, or how they just tidy up the house, all forms of organising. And I've been talking to my students over the last few years about the chaos of this, right? Because Neptune represents, like I said, is the planet that rules Pisces. And so if you think of Poseidon or Neptune in mythology, there were 3 classic ways that Neptune would appear. Sometimes he would emerge from the seas in calm, clear waters. So Neptune is a symbol of clarity. That's good. Neptune at other times would emerge from the seas accompanied by wild tempests and furious storms. So Neptune is also wild emotion and passions that we fear might sweep us away. At other times, Neptune would be accompanied by fog. So it represents confusion. And on those occasions when Neptune was accompanied by fog, sailors would be lured to rocks by sirens, these creatures that would sing enchantment. Their boats would be dashed and they would drown in the water. But at the bottom of the ocean, it was said that Neptune, Poseidon, by the way, Neptune is the Roman name and Poseidon is the Greek name, right? But it's the same, similar deities. And at the bottom of the ocean, they had a golden palace. And it said if you entered that golden palace, then you would experience nirvana, an one-ment, an enlightenment, in which there was no pain, no fear. You were connected with everyone and everything. The only thing is that to get to that golden palace, you have to drown. But you don't drown in water, you drown in disappointment. Because if you could see clearly, if you could see everyone absolutely clearly, you'd see the beautiful divine spark inside everyone. There's a beautiful divine spark inside all forms of life. You'd see the beautiful divine spark inside Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and Elton John and Annie Lennox and anyone, and yourself as well, right? The only thing is that if you could see all that clearly, you'd see angels running around with machine guns. And that would be horrific. If you could see the potential of humanity, the beauty and the light of what we're capable of, compared with what we do in our behaviours, to ourselves, to other people, and to the environment that holds us. Yes. So some people attempt to escape from the clarity through doing works of compassion to try to get the outside to match to as nice as the inside. So all forms of service and care are a part of that, sacrificing oneself even for the better of everyone. The NHS and other doctors and nurses around the world are doing that right now. They didn't sign up to lose their lives at work. They're not in the military. The media here in the UK use militaristic terms, saying they're on the front line, as if somehow they signed up to kind of risk their life to save others. They didn't. They're not in the army, but they're being asked to do that by virtue not of their managers, but by virtue of their own compassion. Somebody said to me many years ago, the value system of your society, it wasn't English, is somewhat odd to me. And I said, in what way? And he said, well, if a person kicks an inflated pig's bladder or a ball around a piece of grass, they're paid lots of money. But if someone works on a hospital ward and saves lives, they're not. And I thought, that does seem like our value system is a little bit skewed, Yes. The arts, inspired arts, we escape through poetry, music and dance and song. Sometimes we escape through chemicals as well. So for the last few years, we've been looking at this thinking, yes, although this might be the house of health in an individual, that means in the country it's the NHS. So we were thinking, what's going to happen that's going to make the NHS go into a state of bedlam and confusion? And the only thing we could think of was Brexit, because we didn't have the context of the virus at the time in terms of our thinking. Now it makes much more sense. The logistical chaos of supply lines being disrupted, goods and services not being able to be kind of transported from one place to another around the country. Again, I thought that was going to be a Brexit thing, and it turns out that it's the virus that's the cause of that. And you never know, once we finish with the Brexit thing happens at the end of this year, it might even compound that and add to it. We don't know yet where that might go. But there's certainly a lot of kind of confusion and also misinformation, because with confusion you have delusion and illusion, right? And so there's rumour, counter-rumour, all this sort of thing. People not really knowing what is taking place, and at the same time kind of losing track of their daily routines, losing track of time and things like this. So that's a part of what's taking place. Neptune's going to be in this part of the chart, the UK's chart, for about a decade. Alright? So a long-term protracted thing. But remember, Neptune also represents clarity. Alright? So things could get healed. Things can get clarified. Things can become more ideal during this period of time. Oh, and I think it's worth adding, since we mentioned there about the forecast that I do for the UK every year with my students is just to have a quick mention of this. It would be disingenuous to go over all of the material, because they book up a place and things like this, and so you have to pay honour to their student loyalty. But I want to give you a bit of an insight. This is what we call an astrological time map. And so you can see there's a calendar, and I've set it so that it goes from January 2020 right the way through to January 2021 at the top. In the left-hand column, there is planetary data. And the computer has looked at where planets are in the sky right now, compared them to positions that they held in the United Kingdom's chart. So that's just after midnight on the 1st of January 1801, and then made calculations to look for significant angles, angular relationships. And wherever it finds a significant angle, it puts an X in the time map to show whereabouts those relationships or when they take place. There is a process or phenomenon called retrograde motion. That doesn't mean things go backwards. Nothing goes backwards, but it looks that way from where we are because we're on a ball going around a ball. So if there's a planet orbiting the sun and we come along and we overtake on the inside, we're going faster. So in that moment where we overtake on the inside, it makes the outer one, looks like it's going backwards. It isn't going backwards, it just looks that way. And because of that retrograding process, it can seem as if a planet occupies a portion of the sky for a protracted period of time. And so on those occasions in the time map, these X's mark where there are certain exactitudes in those rhythms. And that means it's sort of in the air for a while. And you can just see this graphic display of movement, right, indicating these periods of time. Now, in the astrology of a person, one would look at planets representing parts of our lives, behaviours that we do, people that we know, contexts that we're in, our health, etc. But in the context of a collective way of looking at things, it's called mundane astrology. That's not boring astrology. It means Monday comes from the French word for world. So in other words, it's looking at the world soul. And so that means that one reads the astrology in a collective sense and not in an individual sense. So in a collective sense, the moon represents the people and Jupiter represents protection and luck. In mythology, Jupiter was prayed to for protection. And so Jupiter opposing the UK's moon from the end of February right the way through until basically the midway through October. It'll be the beginning of November by the time that fades out. Suggests, and I said this in this year's recording, that for a reason I didn't understand at the time, that the elderly, the vulnerable and the disabled would be more vulnerable than normal all the way through the whole of this year. And we were trying to figure out what's going to happen. I mean, because, we know that the elderly, the vulnerable and the disabled are kind of more vulnerable anyway, because there's a Tory government, right? And, Department of Work and Pensions has been found somewhat lacking by the United Nations, right? And there's a report about that a couple of years ago. So when your own country is investigated by the UN, it suggests that there's some kind of issue or problem. And they found that our government that we keep voting for is not caring for the disabled or the vulnerable very well. In fact, there are shortfalls. So I just thought it was something about that. There's a resurgence of Toryism. They've got like a more of a mandate in Parliament. Maybe there's going to be an austerity crunch. And that would fit with the context of already knowing that there's going to be a global crash again. And so I just put it down to that. But when you think about it in terms of the virus, the astrology doesn't show us when lockdown will end. But it does give an indication of how long the vulnerability is going to hold in the air. So people who are on the at-risk register might continue to be at risk right until the end of the year. That also suggests that there is some kind of change at the end of the year, which might be a medical solution or vaccine of some kind, brought in early. It's a possibility, but not necessarily a given. Neptune trine the moon, Neptune trine Neptune as well. These both suggest long periods of compassion. Saturn opposing the UK's Jupiter suggests a tightness of finances, restrictions on finances that starts to kind of bite through April, but really starts to take hold at the end of April. And that kind of restricted finances and sense of an unwillingness of optimism. In other words, kind of a sense of, I guess, of insecurity is kind of in the air right through until the beginning of next year. So although the lockdown thing might end anytime really that the government decide, or at least once the the death rates come down enough and the NHS can look after the people without being overwhelmed. How that's metered is going to take a while, but the ripples are going to last a long while. These Uranus transits, by the way, do suggest that there'll be an increase in the kind of sense of altruism that we've been talking about already. Now, back to that fourth house and the foundations of our psyche and what's going on. Saturn's going to be moving through the fourth house, UK's fourth house, for maybe a year or so yet. We'll have a look at that in a moment. Mars is about to leave. We'll talk about Mars in a second. Jupiter is going to move into the sign of Aquarius later this year. Saturn's there at the moment. It's going to oscillate back and forth. Mars is in Aquarius. Now, Mars in Aquarius is a recipe for unrest. And I don't mean unrest in terms of civil unrest, or it could be that, but I mean restlessness within oneself. Right? Having Mars in the fourth house, imagine there's a part of you that wants to express yourself. You want to go, yeah, you want to go out, you want to run around, you want to say hello to people, you want to do stuff, right? But you can't because you're contained. And so the feeling of that would be a little bit like, a wasp in a bottle going, bzz, frustration. Yeah. Mars in Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign of rebellion as well as of individualism. And that means not paying attention to rules, to be unconventional, to be unique, to be different. And if everyone's staying in, the thing to do that's being different is to go out, right? Now, while Mars is in the UK's fourth house, that sense of rebellious drive is contained. But Mars is about to go into the fifth house of social dynamics and creativity. So what we can do here is have a look at when that's going to take place. And it's tomorrow. Right? So on the 21st of April, there you go. You see, there's Mars on the 20th of April, still contained in the fourth house like a wasp in a bottle. And from the 21st of April, the wasp flies out of the bottle. Now, I'm just going to put this onto weeks because I can shove this forward a little bit of time. There's Mars moving forwards. This is on a weekly basis, right? And Mars goes into the UK's sixth house. When is that? Hold on a minute. Let's just get the date because it will show the date at the top over here. Yes, so it changes on the 9th of June. So Mars going through the UK's fifth house here from the 21st of April all the way through to the 9th of June, right? Suggests a possibility of unrest becoming a little bit more vocal or even being enacted out in a physical way. There is a change of sign. Mars is only in Aquarius until just about there, which is around the 12th of May, right? So on the 13th of May, Mars goes into Pisces. And that means although Mars is going through an expressive part of the chart, the fifth house, it's now being filtered through the lens of either confusion or compassion, depending on how people express themselves through that. So we have a bit of a rebellion potential between the 21st of April and the 12th of May. Okay, but I'm just going to change that to days so I can give you the exact. There you go. From the 21st of April until the 13th of May, there's a potential for there to be a few examples of people finding their restlessness kind of bursts out and they have an outburst. So, yeah, be mindful of that. Of course, that depends on a person's disposition, their geography, the context of them. So for some people that might mean writing an angry letter to the Times. For other people or other geographies, it might mean an explosive kind of reaction in some way of civil unrest or looting shops and things. So depending on the geography where people are, that will have a bearing. Now, Mars isn't going through the fifth house in every country's chart because countries are all different. So you have to look at the actual chart of a country to see where Aquarius is in the chart of that country, and then kind of plot Mars moving through whichever area of life it's moving through. But in a general sense, and this is a generalization, so generalizations are not accurate, right, by definition, but in a general sense, Mars going through Aquarius does suggest that it's more difficult for people to have self-restraint. So I thought I'd kind of just talk about this today because there's a chance that it could change a little bit tomorrow. Now, let's have a look at this Jupiter down here. I'm going to change the timing of this from weeks to months. So let's just move that forward. There we go. So we're going in July. Jupiter's going, it's retrograde, it's going backwards. Then it goes S, that means it's stationary. That's in September. And then Jupiter starts to come forwards again. And it goes into Aquarius just before January. So I'll back that up into days just to, there you go. 0 degrees Aquarius. So that's on the 22nd of December, Yule. So Jupiter goes into Aquarius at Yule at the end of 2020, which is around the time that our solar year is reborn in the Northern Hemisphere. And this suggests that there'll be a more kind of almost like a humanitarian approach to foreign relationships, and not just with the UK, but with everywhere. You know, so it might well be the case that human systems realise how integrated human systems are. What that means for us politically is another matter. You know, that's a different discussion, I guess, because that would be quite UK focused. But in general sense for the world, I think that there'll be a few things that come out of that. One is that they on a kind of like a basic level, there could be a movement towards greater integration of some form. On another level, it could reveal that the disconnectedness of different cultures and cultures show themselves to be lacking in humanitarianism, and there could be a desire for repair or reparation of things. I remember with something that Bono, the singer of U2, once said he was invited to speak at a Labour Party conference. Not sure when it was in the 90s. And I think it was the 90s. But there was something he said that really struck me. And he said that the movement they wanted to do so that they could have changes in regulation around African countries and how those countries' goods, imports and exports were treated, tariffs and things. He said, this isn't about charity. You know, these nations don't need charity. What they need is justice. And that's because the way that they could charge for goods and the way that they would charge to import things or export things was unfair, and everything was like biased towards kind of European and American business. And it meant that these countries were unable to kind of lift themselves up, even though they had a lot of skill to be able to do so. So it was kind of unfairly laden in that kind of sense. So those sorts of things might become better addressed when Jupiter goes through Aquarius, or at least we become aware of the fact that they need to be. And that means something has to happen that causes us to become aware that they need to be. Social reform isn't necessarily something that happens instantly, but you have to be aware there's a problem before you can fix it. So Jupiter going through Aquarius through 2021 could highlight some of those kind of concerns. And with Jupiter conjunct Saturn at the same time, that again suggests that political systems might need to kind of reevaluate in some kind of fashion. Now, Saturn's going to be in Aquarius for quite a long time. I'm just going to switch this to years. So let's just look at, there's Saturn. Saturn finally leaves the UK's fourth house in 2022. And Saturn goes into Pisces at some point in 2023. I'll just put this onto months and flick this forward. There we go. Oh, a bit too far. There. Right. So Saturn goes into Pisces in February 2023. Maybe the beginning of March. Let's be a bit more precise. There. March 2023. And that suggests that there'll be a kind of a change in political dynamics as well. So Saturn has just gone into Aquarius. Let's just back up, put that back into years and return to, here we are in 2020 since March, but that'll do. So Saturn in Capricorn has meant that there's been a kind of an austere time in British politics, certainly, for about 3 years, all the way through since the Brexit thing, really. Now, with Saturn in Aquarius, this suggests that a new dynamic has taken place. There'll be a new, like a revision of what we're doing with our political system that's taking place right now, and that's going to continue until Saturn goes into Pisces, as I said, in around March 2023. And then there'll be a brand new kind of political paradigm again. And these paradigms kind of are cyclic, all right? So I realized once that I'd been teaching astrology for the same amount of time that I've been politically aware. And at that time, the coalition had just been voted in. Well, not voted in, but there was a coalition because there was a hung parliament in Britain in 2010. And we'd just come out of a period of Saturn going through Virgo. And Saturn in Virgo really did describe the Gordon Brown years. You know, there was a lot of inward-looking critique of expenses and things like this, expense scandals. And so the machinery of Parliament itself, it's how it was organised, was being reviewed and looked at. The coalition was literally a thing of balance, right? Libra. Saturn went into Scorpio in 2012, and politics began to polarize. And then Saturn went into Sagittarius, and so there was all this kind of thing about our relationship with foreign things, The Brexit vote happened, Saturn went into Capricorn, and things became kind of pessimistic and difficult and protracted, and now and austere even more, and now Saturn's gone into Aquarius, and suddenly there's this kind of like, oh, do you remember community? Do you remember looking after your next door neighbour? Do you remember having a next door neighbour? Right? And so there's this kind of change in terms of thinking about group mind, and that's happening at the moment. So there's all the way through Saturn's little kind of jaunt through Aquarius. So that's from now. This is through next year, 2021, 2022. Then in 2023, there'll be a change again. All right. So these are kind of steps towards that long-term change of Pluto going into Aquarius, which will kind of give almost like a deeper foundation. So you can almost think of it like the age that we're going through, in terms of the age of Aquarius and things. It's a little bit like looking at the book from the outside. You see the cover, and that's like the story. And then within that story, you have chapters, and within those chapters there are pages, and within those pages there are the sentences, and within the sentences are the words. And so it's like looking at like a broad lens into a more refined lens, a more refined lens, a more refined lens. So you get more and more detail of the minute steps, or you can zoom out, if you like, and kind of look at the picture as a whole. So in the context of the age of Aquarius, Pluto moving towards Aquarius and then into Aquarius itself suggests to me that there'll be an acceleration, there'll be an ushering in of all of the dynamics that are potentially Aquarian, and Saturn will be in Aquarius at that same time as well, which to me suggests hopefully a move towards altruism, incredible advances in technologies, and human beings looking at one another in terms of global family. A problem, of course, could be that the science goes mad and human beings go crazy, and we end up going towards some kind of shadowed version of ourselves as a global situation. What we do and which direction it goes, I believe, is steered by you and me, and what we do as individuals. So by encouraging as many people as possible to be kind, to be compassionate, to be thoughtful, to be considerate, to be kind to yourself as well, to have self-compassion as well as compassion for others. The more we can do that, then perhaps the closer we can get to Albert Einstein's notion of, to free ourselves from this prison, we must widen our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures. I hope you've enjoyed this little excursion into the realm of a broader look at astrology. And if you want to know anything about a normal astrological practice that I do, whether that means kind of learning with me or becoming a student, or even just experiencing readings one-to-one. So I work online. You can do that. Just go to rowanastrology.com, and if you can't find the information you're looking for, please write to me, and I'll be very, very happy to answer any questions you have. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to connect with you again. Thank you very much.